wait, where are you? If you've watched some of my videos, you'll notice I have a little bit different background this week. I've escaped my office. I'm visiting my parents in Louisville, Kentucky. And while I'm here, it made me think of two topics. And one I'll cover this week, which is about communication and for managers, when you communicate, how you communicate with employees, and also how you set communication expectations with employees. Next week, I'll talk about a different topic, which is for managers, how you support employees when they're going through something that you've never experienced yourselves. But let's talk about communication and why being here makes me think of it. So a couple weeks ago, I posted a post on Instagram saying, if you're a manager and you wouldn't knock on your employee's door at 10 o'clock at night, then maybe that email or message to them could wait till the next morning as well. And I got a lot of comments. Some of them said, emails are asynchronous, so you can send them whenever and people can read them whenever. I also got comments saying things like, employees are too soft, everyone's so sensitive. And I wanted to talk about those comments and why I'm here. So, in particular, there are things like global teams. When you're on a global team, then certainly there's going to be an expectation you're going to get emails at different times. And this is for people in more corporate roles. That's why it's really important for managers to set that expectation to employees. What does that look like? Because employees, if they start and all of a sudden they're waking up to a full inbox and they're going in bed to a full inbox, then it can feel really overwhelming, especially if they haven't gotten guidance about when they're expected to respond. So that's why for managers, I think it's really important to set those working hours. And at times you may need to talk to global teams, but so talking to employees about trying to limit the need for live conversations as much as possible so that people can work within their own time zones, but setting that expectation clearly. Because a lot of managers miss that step, that letting employees know when they're going to be expected to respond. So other employees, when you're not in global, if you've been in a situation where you have a manager in your same time zone, and you wake up frequently to emails that are like midnight, 1, 2 a.m., it can feel incredibly overwhelming and have a pit in your stomach. And some managers will say, that's when I need to work. It's on the employees. And again, as managers, I say this all the time, managers can choose to often do whatever they want. But it also has impacts for employees. And so it's really important to recognize for employees how those communications are sending. And so for employees, is that going to make them less productive? Because when they wake up, they have this dread about what's going to have popped in their inbox in the middle of the night, seeing that you're working at all hours and making them think, do I need to do that? But also for managers, part of your role is ideally moving up in the organization and having a succession plan, or employees that want to move as well. Well, employees will often tell you if they wake up and see that your workload requires you to work at all hours, that's probably a job they may not be as interested in. And so this idea of sending communications at all hours, especially to people within your own time zone, has kind of two effects. One is that immediate effect and how it impacts employees' productivity and engagement. But then overall, it's also how long they want to stay at your organization, and if they want to move into leadership, if that's what they want leadership to look like for them. So that's why I really encourage managers to think about that. And again, there's also the benefits to yourself, because if you're constantly working till midnight, 1, 2 a.m., that can be really hard to sustain. I've lived that life. As a lawyer, I went for months and would bill into 1 and 2 in the morning. And it was great. I got a bonus the next year. But I remember thinking, this is so exhausting. I can't do this for years on end. So as a manager, especially in those corporate roles, being mindful for employees and using things like delayed send, scheduled send, which are tools you can often do in Gmail or Outlook to send communications. But I think also the note that managers had, employees are so soft, it doesn't recognize that employees are human beings and people have very real feelings. And so it's really important to talk to employees to get a sense of when I communicate, how does it bug you if I'm sending notes at all hours? Because a lot of employees may be thinking, absolutely it does. So getting that feedback can be helpful for you as a manager, because whether or not you like how it impacts employees, how it impacts them is going to impact how they perform work and how long they want to stay at your organization. So being mindful about communication isn't just a nice to have Instagram quote. It's something that can impact your overall leadership and how long your team members stay. So the second is about how managers communicate. And this will be shorter and simple. Is managers, and this isn't just in corporate roles, this is in in-person roles as well. If you ever look on the internet and see examples of signs that managers put, you'll see signs that managers put up about taking breaks or things like that. In some of those messages, when you read them, they just read harsh. And so the one tip I have for managers on communicating with employees is before you send those notes, stop and pause and think, how would I feel if I were the person receiving this? So one example is if you send a note to someone saying like, call me, thanks. And don't include their name, don't include any context. And if you got that note from your boss thinking, oh, that might possibly stress me out. But thinking about any time you send a communication, how would I feel if I were to receive this? Simple things like using someone's name, providing details, and also asking, does this time work or would another time work better? Shows that respect for your teammate that is important so that when they come to the conversation, they're prepared and that it's not a dictatorship and they feel like, oh, now I'm in trouble. So the other is on the how is if you have like things like team messages or printed signs, again, reading that before you put it up and thinking, if someone were to put this on the internet, how would this read? Because sometimes messages come across really unnecessarily harsh. As you may be in a bad mood, you may be going through things, or you may just be frustrated overall. But thinking about that, because a lot of leadership is about the way you communicate and those type of aspects with employees and how messages are received. So before you're sending anything, thinking about how you'd feel if you read it, or if you were a stranger on the internet. The last I mentioned is setting expectations for employees. And that's what circles back to like why I'm here visiting my parents. So I'm here and I have my business, and so I'm working with companies, so I did a little bit of work today. The next 2 days I'm really taking to be with my family. It's really important to me. But now I have my own business, and still I have those thoughts of, okay, how do you communicate with people to let them know whether you'll be out or not? But when I was employee and much more junior in my career, I remember having absolutely no idea and feeling frequently like I needed to be on, like if I was on vacation or if I was sick, trying to still be present and accountable. And that caused a lot of stress, because it's obviously, especially when you're sick, but even when you're on vacation, if you've lived that time of being on vacation and having family or friends saying like, oh, you're back on your laptop again. And so with employees, as separate from your communication as a manager and thinking about when and how you're communicating, but talking to employees really on day one, and if you haven't done it, it's never too late to have a team meeting and talk to employees and say, what kind of expectations do you feel like would make our team get the work done, but also allow you to recharge after hours, like when you take time off. And so helping employees think through that. Like if they're at a conference, sometimes employees get stressed out going to a conference that's really important information because they think, can I listen to what's going on, or am I supposed to be working while doing it? And so for managers, at times it may feel like, wait, don't people know these things already? But if you think about it, a lot of us in our careers found things out by feeling like we needed to communicate with, it was just an unwritten, unexpected, or just expected rule. Or other people see other managers having like an out of office that they like and thinking, so you can set those expectations. But so as a manager, writing down, as you're watching this video, some things for your teams, thinking about, have I talked to them when they're on time off and letting them know, can they turn off their mail on their phones if they have phones? Or if they go to things like conferences, what's the expectations? Because the more that you can allow employees to recharge when they're on vacation or when they're sick, to focus on their health, or if they're at a conference, focusing on that material, while at times it can feel overwhelming if you have a lot going on, taking time to pause can often help employees be more productive. I'll include in the notes some of the data that supports this. So as a manager, the 3 big takeaways today are 1, thinking about when you communicate. And if you haven't had conversations with employees, talking about those. As I've sent emails in the night, you know that you don't have to respond during those hours, but also thinking about how that impacts employees. 2 is the how. Are you reading messages before you send them and thinking, how would it feel if I received this? And then 3, with employees, what conversations have you had, whether it's with your teams overall or one-on-one conversations, to make sure employees understand the expectations on communication, and that the way they're expected to communicate does help them to be engaged and want to stay and grow in your organization. So those are my 3 things for this week. I'll film part 2, which you'll see next week, which is on a different topic.